Chapter 7. We passed a few sad hours until 11 o'clock when the trial was to commence, my father and the rest of the family being obliged to attend as witnesses. I accompanied them to the courts. During the whole of this wretched mockery of justice, I suffered living torture. It was to be decided whether the result of my curiosity and lawless devices would be the cause of death of my two fellow beings. One, a smiling babe, full of innocence and joy, and the other far more dreadfully murdered, with every aggravation of infamy that could make murder memorable and horror. Justine also was a girl of merit. She possessed qualities which promised to render her life happy. Now all was to be obliterated in an ignominious grave, and I, the cause. 1,000 times rather I would have confessed myself guilty of the crime, describes Justine. But I was absent when it was committed. Such declaration would have been considered the ravings of a madman, and would not have been exculpated who suffered through me. The appearance of Justine was calm. She was dressed in mourning, and her countenance, always engaging, was rendered by the solemn of her feelings and exquisite beauty. She appeared confident in her innocence, and did not tremble, although gazed upon and exorcised thousands, for all the kindness which her beauty might otherwise have excited was obliterated in the minds of the spectators by the imagination of the enormity she was supposed to have committed. She was tranquil, yet her tranquillity was evidently strained, and her confusion had been before deducted to the proof of guilt. She worked up in her mind to the appearance of courage. When she entered the court, she threw her eyes around it and quickly discovered where we were seated. A tear seemed to dim in her eye as she saw us, but she quickly recovered herself. The look of sorrowful affection seemed to attest her utter guiltlessness. The trial began, and after the advocate against her stated the charge, several witnesses were called. Several strange facts combined against her, which might have staggered any one of those who had not been proof of her innocence as I had. She had been out the whole of the nights on which the murder had been committed, and towards morning had been received by a market woman not far from the spot where the body of the murdered child had been afterwards found. The woman asked her what she did there, but she looked very strangely and only returned a confused and unintelligible answer. She returned to the house at 8 o'clock, and when one inquired where she had been for nights, she replied that she had been looking for the child, and demanded earnestly if anything had been heard concerning him. When shown the body, she fell into violent hysterics, and kept her bed for several days. A picture was then produced, which the servant had found in her pockets, and when Elizabeth, in a faltering voice, proved that it was the same picture, an hour before the child had been missed, she had placed around his neck. A murmur of horror and indignation filled the court. Justine was called on for her defense. As the trial proceeded, she recounted and altered. The surprise, horror, and misery were very strongly expressed. Sometimes she struggled with her tears, but when she was able to plead, she collected her powers and spoke in an audible, although variable voice. God knows, she said, how entirely I am innocent, but I do not pretend that my protestation should acquit me. I rest my innocence on the plain and simple explanation of the facts which have been adduced against me, and I hope the character I have always borne will incline the judges to favorable interpretation, where any circumstances appear doubtful or suspicious. Then she related that, by the permission of Elizabeth, she had passed the evening of the night of the murder was committed at the house of her aunt Justine, a village situated about a league from Geneva. On her return, at about 9 o'clock, she met a man who asked her if she had seen anything of the child who was lost. She was Alarmed by the account, I passed several hours looking for him. The gates of Geneva were shut, and she was forced to remain several hours of the night in the barn belonging to a cottage, being unwilling to call up the inhabitants to whom she was well known. Unable to rest or sleep, she quitted the asylum early, that she might again endeavor to find my brother. If she had gone near the spot where his body lay, it was without her knowledge. That she had been bewildered when questioned by the market woman was not surprising, since she had passed a sleepless night, and the fate of poor William was yet uncertain. Concerning the picture, she could give no account. I know, continued the unhappy victim, how heavily and fatally this one circumstance weighs against me, but I have no power of explaining it, and when I have expressed my utter ignorance, I am only left with conjecture concerning the probabilities by which it might have been placed in my pockets. But here I am, checked. I believe that I have no enemy on earth, and none surely would have been so wicked as to destroy me wantonly. Did the murderer place it there? I know of no opportunity afforded him for doing it so. Why should he be stolen the jewel to part with it again so soon? I commit my cause to the justice of the judges, yet I see no room for hope. I beg permission to have a few witnesses examined concerning my character, and if the testimony shall not overweigh my supposed guilt, I must be condemned, although I would pledge my salvation on my innocence. Several witnesses were called, who had known her for many years, and they spoke well of her. But fear and hatred of crime of which they supposed her guilty rendered them timorous and unwilling to come forward. Elizabeth saw even this last resource, her excellent dispositions and irreproachable conduct, but to fail the accused when, although violently agitated, she desired permission to address the court. I am, said she, the cousin of the unhappy child who was murdered, or rather his sister, for I was educated by and have lived with his parents ever since, and even long before his birth. It may be, therefore, judgment innocent in me to come forward on this occasion. But when I see a fellow creature about to perish through the cowardice of her pretended friends, I wish to be allowed to speak, that I may say what I know of her character. I am well acquainted with the accused. I have lived in the same house with her, at one time for 5, and at another for 2 years. During all of that period she appeared to me the most amicable and benevolent of human creatures. She nursed Madame Frankenstein, my aunt, in her last illness with the greatest affection and care, and afterwards attended her own mother during her tedious illness in a manner that excited the admiration of all who knew her. After which she again lived in my uncle's house, where she was beloved by all the family. She was warmly attached to the child who is now dead, and I acted towards him like the most affectionate mother. For my own part, I do not hesitate to say that, notwithstanding all the evidence produced against her, I believe and rely on her perfect innocence. She had no temptation for such an action. As to the bauble on which the chief proof rests, if she had earnestly desired it, I should have willingly given it to her. So much do I esteem and value her. Excellent, Elizabeth. The murmur of approbation was heard, but it was excited by her generous interference, and not in favor of poor Justine, on whom the public indignation was turned with renewed violence, charging her blackest ingratitude. She herself wept as Elizabeth spoke, but she did not answer. My own agitation and anguish was extreme during the whole trial. I believed in her innocence. I knew it. Could the demon, who had, I did not for a minute doubt, murdered my brother, also in this hellish sport have betrayed the innocent to death and ignominy? I could not sustain the horror of learning my situation, when I perceived that the popular voice, and the countenances of the judges had already condemned my unhappy victim. I rushed out of the court in agony. The tortures of the accused did not equal mine. She was sustained by innocence, but the fangs of remorse tore my bosom, and would not forgo their hold. I passed the night of unmingled wretchedness. In the morning I went to the court. My lips and throat were parched. I dared not ask for the fatal question, but I was known, and the officer guessed the cause of my visit. The ballots had been thrown. They were all black, and Justine was condemned. I cannot pretend to describe what I then felt. I had before experienced sensations of horror, and I have endeavored to bestow upon them adequate expressions, but words cannot convey an idea of the heart-sickening despair that I then endured. The person to whom I addressed myself added that Justine had already confessed her guilt. That evidence, he observed, was hardly required in so glaring a case, but I am glad of it, and indeed none of our judges like to condemn a criminal upon circumstantial evidence, be it ever so decisive. When I returned home, Elizabeth eagerly demanded the result. My cousin, I replied, had just decided as you may have expected. All the judges had rather that 10 innocents should suffer, that one guilty should escape. But she has confessed. This was a dire blow to poor Elizabeth, who had relieved the firmness of Justine's innocence. Alas, she said, how shall I ever again believe in human benevolence? Justine, whom I love and esteem as my sister, how could she put on those smiles of innocence only to betray? Her mild eyes seemed incapable of any severity or ill humor, and yet she has committed a murder. Soon after, we heard that the poor victim had expressed a wish to see my cousin. My father wished her not to go, but said that he left it to her own judgment and feelings to decide. Yes, said Elizabeth, I will go, although she is guilty, and you, Victor, shall accompany me. I cannot go alone. The idea of this visit was torture to me, yet I could not refuse. We entered the gloomy prison chamber, and beheld Justine sitting on some straw at the further end. Her hands were manacled, and her head rested on her knees. She rose on seeing us enter, and when we were left alone with her, she threw herself at the feet of Elizabeth, weeping bitterly. My cousin wept also. "Oh, Justine," she said, "why did you rob me of my last consolation? I relied on your innocence, and although I was very wretched, I was not so miserable as I am now. And do you also believe that I am very, very wicked? Do you also join with the enemies to crush me?" Her voice was suffocated with sobs. "Rise, my poor girl," said Elizabeth. "Why do you kneel, if you are innocent? I am not one of your enemies. I believed your guiltlessness, notwithstanding every evidence, till I heard that you yourself had declared your guilt. The report, you say, is false. And be assured, dear Justine, that nothing can shake my confidence in you for a moment, but your own confession. I did confess, but I confessed a lie. I confessed. I confessed that I might obtain absolution. But now that falsehood lies heavier on my heart than all my other sins. The God of heaven forgive me. Ever since I was condemned, my confessor has besieged me. He threatened, he menaced, until I almost began to think that I was the monster that he said I was. He threatened excommunication and hellfire in my last moments if I continued to obdurate. Dear lady, I had none to support me. All looked on as me as a wretch doomed to ignominy and perdition. What could I do? In an evil hour I subscribed to a lie, and now I am only truly miserable. She paused, weeping, and then continued. I thought with horror, my sweet lady, that you should believe your Justine, whom your blessed aunt had so highly honored, and whom you loved, was a creature capable of a crime which none but the devil himself could have perpetrated. Dear William, dearest blessed child, I soon shall see you again in heaven, where we shall be happy, but that consoles me. I'm going to suffer ignominy and death. Oh, Justine, forgive me for having for one moment distrusted you. Why did you confess? But do not mourn, my dear girl. I will everywhere proclaim your innocence and force belief. Yet you must die. You, my playfellow, my companion, my more than sister. I never can survive so horrible misfortune. Dear sweet Elizabeth, do not weep. You ought to raise me with the thoughts of a better life, and elevate me from the petty cares of this world of injustice and strife. Do not you, excellent friend, drive me to despair. I will try to conform you, but this, I fear, is an evil too deep and poignant to admit consolation, for there is no hope. Yet heaven bless thee, my dearest Justine, with resignation and a confidence elevated beyond this world. Oh, how I hate the shrews and mockeries! When one creature is murdered and another is immediately deprived of life in the slow, torturing manner, then the executioners, their hands yet reckoning with blood of innocents, believe that they have done a great deed. They call this retribution. Hateful name! When that word is pronounced, I know greater and more horrid punishments are going to be inflicted than the gloomiest tyrant has ever invented to satiate his utmost revenge. Yet this is not consolation for you, my Justine, unless indeed that you are the glory of escaping from such a miserable death. Alas, I would I were at peace with my aunts and my lovely William, escaped from a world which is hateful to me, and the visages of men which I abhor. Justine smiled languidly. This, dear lady, is despair, and not resignation. I must not learn the lesson that you would teach me. Talk of something else, something that will bring peace and not increase of misery. During this conversation, I had retired to a corner of the prison room where I could conceal the horrid anguish that possessed me. Despair. Who dared talk of that? The poor victim. On the morning when I was dreary born on the past the dreary boundary between life and death, felt not as I did. Such deep and bitter agony. I gnashed my teeth and ground them together, uttering a groan that came from my inmost soul. Justine started. When she saw who it was, she approached me and said, Dear sir, you are very kind to visit me. I hope, do not believe that I am guilty. I could not answer. No, Justine, said Elizabeth. He is more convinced of your innocence than I was, for even when he heard that you had confessed, he did not credit it. I truly thank him. In these last moments I feel the sincerest gratitude towards those who think of me with kindness. How sweet is the affection of others to so wretched as I am. It removes more than half my misfortune, and I feel as if I could die in peace, now that the innocence is acknowledged by you, dear lady, and your cousin. Thus the poor sufferer tried to comfort others and herself. She indeed gained the resignation she desired. But I, the true murderer, felt a never-dying worm alive in my bosom, which allowed with no hope or consolation. Elizabeth also wept, and was unhappy, for hers also was a misery of innocence, which, like a cloud that passeth over the fair moon, for a while hides, but cannot tarnish its brightness. Anguish and despair had penetrated into the core of my heart. I bore a hell within me, which nothing could extinguish. We stayed several hours with Justine, and it was with great difficulty that Elizabeth could tear herself away. I wish, cried she, that I were to die with you. I cannot live in this world of misery. Justine assumed an air of cheerfulness, while she was with difficulty repressed with bitter tears. She embraced Elizabeth and said, in a voice of half-suppressed emotion, Farewell, sweet lady, dearest Elizabeth, my beloved and only friend. May heaven in its bounty bless and preserve you. May this be the last misfortune that you will ever suffer. Live and be happy, and make others so. As we returned, Elizabeth said, "You know not, my dear Victor, how much I am relieved, now that I trust the innocence of this misfortunate girl. I never could again have known peace if I had been deceived by my reliance on her. For the moment that I did believe her guilty, I felt an anguish that I could not have long sustained. Now my heart is light. The innocent suffers, but she whom I thought amiable and good was not betrayed my trust and repose in her, and I am consoled. Amiable cousin, such were your thoughts, mild and gentle at your own dear eyes and voice. But I was a wretch, and none ever conceived of the misery that I then endured.